Kethro stood near the observation window of the Stellar Covenant and watched the stars drift past. His forearms were folded behind his back. His compound eyes reflected the cold light of distant suns. He had served in the Sylvani military for 12 cycles, and he had never felt so uncertain about a mission. It was not the mission itself that troubled him. The objective was clear. Land on Valen 4. Infiltrate the enemy outpost. Destroy their communications array. Simple enough for any trained soldier. No. What troubled Kethro was his team. He turned from the window and looked across the briefing room. 3 humans sat at the far table, talking among themselves. They spoke in low voices, but every few moments one of them would laugh. The sound was strange to Kethro's ears. Sharp and sudden, like a bark. Humans. Of all the species in the Galactic Coalition, he had been assigned to fight alongside humans. Kethro had read the reports, of course. Everyone had. When humans first appeared on the galactic stage, the Coalition had dismissed them as primitives. Their technology was crude. Their lifespans were short. Their bodies were soft and weak, lacking natural armor or claws or venom. But then the Kethfor Dominion had attacked human colonies. And everything changed. The reports described battles that should have been massacres. Human settlements with no proper defenses, facing Dominion war machines. And yet the humans had fought back. They had fought with tools and rocks and bare hands when their weapons failed. They had fought even when they were dying. They had fought until the Dominion forces retreated in confusion. The Coalition had taken notice. Humans were invited to join the war effort. And now, 6 years later, human soldiers served on ships throughout the fleet. Kethral did not understand why the Coalition valued them so highly. Yes, humans were persistent. Yes, they bred quickly and replaced their losses faster than most species. But they were still fragile. Still primitive in many ways. He suspected the Coalition kept them around for their numbers, not their skill. The door opened and Commander Vexan entered the room. She was Sylvani like Kethral, her carapace gleaming under the artificial lights. Behind her came more soldiers. 2 Drethkai with their scaled hides. A Moravian engineer with 6 legs and delicate manipulator arms. And finally, more humans. "Attention," Commander Vexan said. Her voice was calm and precise. "You have all been briefed on the mission parameters. I am here to introduce your team leaders and confirm final assignments." She gestured toward the humans at the far table. One of them stood. He was of average height for his species, with short dark hair and a face that seemed permanently relaxed. His eyes moved across the room, taking in each soldier with quiet attention. "This is Sergeant Daniel Perry," Commander Vexan said. "He will lead the ground assault team. Kethral, you are assigned to his unit." Kethral felt his mandibles click in displeasure. A human sergeant. Leading him, Perry walked over and extended his hand. Kethral stared at it for a moment before remembering the human greeting custom. He reached out with one of his upper arms and allowed Perry to grip it briefly. "Good to meet you," Perry said. His voice was low and unhurried. "You're Sylvani Special Forces, right? We're lucky to have you." "I am trained in infiltration and close combat," Kethral replied stiffly. "I will perform my duties." Perry nodded as if this was exactly what he expected to hear. He did not seem offended by Kethral's coldness. He simply turned and gestured toward the other humans at the table. "That's Corporal Lisa Vance, our demolitions expert, and Private Marcus Cole, rifleman. They're good soldiers. You can count on them." Kethral looked at the 2 humans. Vance was a female with short yellow hair and a wide smile. She waved at him in a manner that seemed almost mocking. Cole was younger, with dark skin and serious eyes. He simply nodded. "We deploy in 4 hours," Perry continued. "Get your gear ready." Rest if you can. He walked back to join the other humans. Within moments, they were talking again, laughing again. Catherall watched them and felt his unease grow. His species prepared for battle with meditation and silence. They reviewed tactics. They checked their equipment multiple times. They focused their minds until nothing remained but the mission. Humans prepared for battle by telling jokes that made no sense to him. Did they not understand what awaited them on Valen 4? The Dominion forces were well-armed and ruthless. Death was a real possibility for every soldier on this mission. And yet the humans laughed. Over the next few hours, Catherall prepared his equipment in the traditional Sylvani way. He cleaned his blade until it gleamed. He checked his rifle's power cells. He reviewed the outpost schematics until he could navigate them with his eyes closed. The humans, meanwhile, played some kind of game with small rectangular cards. Vance won most rounds and celebrated loudly each time. When the deployment hour arrived, Catherall made his way to the shuttle bay. The ground assault team was already assembled. Perry stood near the shuttle door, checking a datapad. He looked up as Catherall approached. "Ready?" Perry asked. "I am always ready," Catherall replied. Perry smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible. "Good answer." They boarded the shuttle. The seats were uncomfortable for Sylvani physiology, but Catherall did not complain. He strapped himself in and watched as the humans did the same. Cole sat across from him, checking his rifle with practiced movements. Vance sat next to Cole, still grinning as if this was some kind of adventure rather than a military operation. Perry took the seat nearest the door. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back. Within moments, his breathing had slowed. He appeared to be sleeping. Catherall stared at him. The human was falling asleep before a combat drop. It was either the height of confidence or the depth of foolishness. The shuttle launched. Catherall felt the familiar pressure of acceleration as they left the stellar covenant behind. Through the small window beside him, he could see the brown and gray surface of Valen 4, growing larger than the first explosion hit. The shuttle rocked violently. Warning lights flashed. The pilot's voice came over the comm, sharp with tension. "Enemy fire." Taking evasive action. Catherall gripped his restraints. His hearts were pounding. Another hit. The shuttle shuddered and dropped. He looked at the humans, expecting to see fear. Perry's eyes were open now. He was looking at the window, watching the enemy fire streak past. His expression was calm, untroubled. Then, slowly, the human smiled. It was not a smile of joy or excitement. It was something else. Something Catherall could not identify. The shuttle continued its violent descent. Catherall prepared himself for death, but beside him, the humans were already reaching for their weapons, and Daniel Perry was still smiling. The shuttle hit the ground hard. Metal screamed. Sparks flew across the cabin. Catherall's head snapped forward against his restraints, and for a moment his vision went dark. When he could see again, the shuttle door was already open. Perry stood silhouetted against the gray sky of Valen 4, his rifle raised and scanning the terrain. "Move!" Perry shouted. "Everyone out!" Catherall released his restraints and stumbled toward the door. His legs felt weak. His mind was still processing the crash. Around him, the other soldiers were moving, but they seemed distant, unreal. Then he was outside. The air was thin and cold, filtered through his helmet. The ground was rocky and barren. In the distance, he could see the outpost, a collection of dark structures built into the side of a cliff. "Form up," Perry ordered. His voice was calm, as if they had not just survived a crash landing. "Standard formation." "Cole, take point." "Vance, rear guard." "Catherall, you're with me." Catherall wanted to protest. His training told him they should assess the situation. Check for injuries. determine if the shuttle could still fly. A dozen tactical considerations demanded attention, but Perry was already moving, leading the team toward a nearby ravine. The other humans followed without question. Catherall had no choice but to follow as well. They moved through the ravine in silence. The walls rose high on either side, providing cover from aerial observation. Perry set a fast pace, his movements efficient and sure. Catherall found himself watching the humans more closely now. The crash had shaken him. It should have shaken them too, but they moved as if nothing had happened. Their steps were steady. Their weapons were ready. Cole walked at the front of the group, his rifle sweeping left and right in continuous motion. His face was blank behind his visor. Focused. Vance followed at the rear, occasionally glancing back to check their trail. Once, she caught Catherall looking at her and gave him a quick thumbs-up gesture. He did not know what it meant. They had traveled perhaps 2 kilometers when Cole raised his fist. The universal signal to stop. Everyone froze. Catherall pressed himself against the ravine wall and activated his helmet's enhanced sensors. He detected movement ahead. Multiple contacts. Enemy patrol. Perry crouched beside him. 8 hostiles, the human whispered. 30 meters ahead, around the bend. Catherall's mind immediately began calculating options. They could wait for the patrol to pass. They could retreat and find another route. They could call for support from other coalition teams. All of these were valid tactical choices. Safe choices. Perry made none of them. Instead, he made a series of quick hand signals to his team. The humans nodded and spread out. Cole moved to the left wall. Vance moved to the right. Perry stayed in the center. Catherall watched in confusion. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "We should avoid contact. Preserve our strength for the main objective." Perry glanced at him. His eyes were steady. "We don't leave enemies at our back." Before Catherall could argue, the humans moved on. It happened so fast that Catherall could barely follow. Cole rounded the bend first, his rifle firing in controlled bursts. 2 enemies fell before they could react. Vance came from the other side, throwing something that exploded with bright light and deafening noise. Then, Perry was among them, moving through the enemy patrol like water through stones. His rifle barked. His knife flashed. Bodies fell. Catherall had fought many battles. He had trained with the finest warriors of his species. He had seen combat across a dozen worlds. He had never seen anything like this. The engagement lasted perhaps 8 seconds. When it was over, 8 enemy soldiers lay dead on the ground. The humans stood among the bodies, checking their weapons and scanning for additional threats. None of them were breathing hard. None of them seemed affected by what they had just done. Catherall approached slowly. His own hearts were racing. The violence had been so sudden, so overwhelming, that his body was still trying to process it. "Clear," Cole reported. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Good work," Perry said. "Let's move." They continued as if nothing had happened. As if killing 8 enemy soldiers was no more significant than stepping over rocks. Catherall fell into, step beside Perry. Questions burned in his mind. He did not know how to ask them. "You are not afraid," he finally said. It was not a question. Perry looked at him. "Fear is natural. Fear keeps you alive. Then why do you not show it? Your hearts should be racing. Your hands should be shaking. But you are calm." Perry was quiet for a moment. Ahead of them, Cole continued to lead the way through the ravine. The outpost was getting closer. "We feel fear," Perry said at last. "We just don't let it control us. Fear is like pain. It's information. You acknowledge it, and then you do what needs to be done anyway." Catherall considered this. In Sylvani culture, fear was a command from the body to the mind. When fear spoke, A wise soldier listened. Retreat was not shameful. Survival was the highest priority. But humans seemed to treat fear differently. They heard its voice and chose to ignore it. "Is that not dangerous?" Kethril asked. "To ignore your body's warnings?" Perry smiled again. That same strange smile from the shuttle. "Very dangerous. Humans break all the time. Bodies and minds both. That's the cost. Then why you do it?" "Because sometimes the mission matters more than the cost." They reached the end of the ravine. The outpost lay ahead, perhaps 500 meters away. Kethril could see guards patrolling the perimeter. Automated turrets scanned the approach. Cole crouched behind a boulder, studying the defenses. Vance knelt beside him, already unpacking her demolition equipment. Perry stopped and turned to Kethril. "You asked if we're afraid. Let me ask you something. Are you afraid right now?" Kethril did not answer. The truth was, he was terrified. The crash, the patrol, the mission ahead. Everything in his body was screaming at him to flee. Perry seemed to read the answer in his silence. "Good. That means you're paying attention." He put a hand on Kethril's shoulder. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. "Stay afraid, friend. Just don't let it stop you." Then Perry moved forward to join his soldiers, leaving Kethril alone with his fear. In the distance. The outpost waited. And Kethril realized with growing unease that he was not afraid of the enemy. He was afraid of the humans beside him, not because they might fail, because they might succeed at any cost, and he was beginning to wonder what that cost might be. They breached the outpost at night. Vance had planted charges on the eastern wall, far from the main entrance. The explosion tore a hole large enough for the team to enter. Alarms screamed. Red lights flashed through the corridors. Perry led them inside without hesitation. Cole followed close behind, then Kethril, then Vance covering their rear. The corridors were narrow and dark. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of crimson. Kethril's compound eyes struggled to adjust. He relied on his other senses, feeling vibrations through the floor, detecting movement through shifts in air pressure. Enemy soldiers came at them from both directions. The fighting was close and brutal. Kethril drew his blade and fought with the precision of Sylvani training. He blocked attacks. He struck at weak points. He moved with the fluid grace his species was known for. But always, at the edge of his vision, he saw the humans fighting too. They were not graceful. They were not precise. They fought like animals, all aggression and raw violence. When their rifles ran dry, they used their rifles as clubs. When enemies got too close, they used fists and knives and teeth, and they did not stop. The team pushed deeper into the outpost. More enemies. More fighting. Kethril felt his strength beginning to fade. His arms ached. His breathing was heavy. He had been in combat for too long. He looked at the humans. They were tired too. He could see it in their movements, the slight slowness that came with exhaustion. But their pace never changed. Their aggression never dimmed. Then Marcus Cole took a hit. An enemy plasma bolt struck his shoulder, burning through his armor. Kethril saw the flash of impact. He saw Cole stagger. He waited for the young human to fall. Cole did not fall. Instead, he let out a grunt of pain and switched his rifle to his other hand. Then he kept firing. Kethril activated his helmet's biometric scanner, linking it to Cole's suit systems. The data that appeared on his display made him freeze. Cole's pain receptors were screaming. His nervous system was flooded with distress signals. His body was telling him, with every fiber of its being, that he was injured and needed to stop. But his heart rate remained controlled. His movements remained steady. His firing remained accurate. Cole's mind was overriding his body's desperate commands. Kethril had seen injured soldiers fight before. Among his own species, a wounded warrior might continue fighting for a few moments, driven by adrenaline and duty. But then the body would take over. Survival instinct would demand retreat and treatment. Humans had the same instincts. Catherall knew this from his studies. Human bodies were weak precisely because they had the same survival mechanisms as every other species. But somehow, human minds could ignore those mechanisms, not suppress them, not diminish them. The data on Catherall's display was clear. Cole was in agony. His body was doing everything it could to make him stop fighting. He simply refused to listen. The team reached a junction. Perry held up a fist, signaling a pause. They took cover behind metal crates and walls, catching their breath while they could. Catherall crouched beside Cole. The young human was leaning against the wall, his injured arm hanging limp at his side. Blood seeped through his armor. His face was pale behind his visor. "You need medical attention," Catherall said. Cole shook his head. "Later, mission first. Your body cannot sustain this damage. If you continue fighting, you may cause permanent harm." Cole looked at him. His eyes were tired but steady. "I know. Then why do you continue?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, just slightly. "Because Sergeant Perry needs me. Because Lisa needs me. Because you need me." He paused. "Because stopping isn't an option." Catherall did not understand. In Sylvani philosophy, the individual existed to serve the collective. But the individual also had a duty to preserve themselves so they could continue serving in the future. A dead soldier could not fight tomorrow's battles. Humans seemed to think differently. They would spend their lives like currency, trading their future for the present moment. It was madness. Beautiful, terrifying madness. Perry appeared beside them. "How's the arm?" he asked Cole. "Functional," Cole replied. Perry nodded as if this was a complete answer. "Good. The communications array is 2 levels down. We move in 60 seconds. From somewhere deeper in the outpost, Catherall heard weapons fire. Vance's voice came over the comm, sharp with excitement. "Got some friends back here. Taking care of them." Catherall listened for fear in her voice. He heard none. Instead, she sounded almost happy, like she was enjoying this. More enemies arrived. More fighting. Vance appeared from a side corridor, her armor scorched but her grin intact. "Miss me?" she asked. Perry rolled his eyes. "Stop having fun. Never." They continued downward. The resistance grew heavier. Enemy soldiers poured from doorways and corridors, throwing everything they had at the invaders. Catherall fought until his arms burned. He fought until his vision blurred. He fought until he could barely stand. The humans fought harder. At some point, Catherall stopped thinking of them as fragile. He stopped thinking of them as primitive. He watched them push through pain and exhaustion and fear. And he realized he had been wrong about everything. Humans were not weak. They were something far worse. They were beings who could feel every wound, every fear, every reason to stop. And they kept going anyway. They had taken the survival instinct that ruled every other species in the galaxy and learned to break it. Not through evolution, not through genetic modification, through pure, stubborn will. Catherall thought of his own species, how they prided themselves on logic and efficiency, how they retreated when the odds turned against them, how they valued their lives above all else. He thought of the humans, bleeding and broken and still fighting. And for the first time in his life, Catherall understood what true horror looked like. It was not the enemy they faced. It was the allies beside him. Because if humans could do this to themselves, what could they do to anyone who stood against them? The communications array was close now. One more level down. One more battle to fight. Perry looked at his team. Cole with his ruined arm. Vance with her scorched armor. Kethril, with his exhausted limbs. Ready? Perry asked. The humans nodded. And Kethril, despite everything his body screamed at him, nodded too. The communications array chamber was heavily defended. Kethril lay flat behind a fallen support beam, watching the enemy positions. Dozens of soldiers had formed a defensive perimeter around the massive transmission tower at the center of the room. Automated turrets covered every approach. Heavy weapons teams had set up behind reinforced barriers. It was a fortress within a fortress. Perry crouched beside him, studying the same scene through his rifle scope. His face was unreadable behind his visor. 60 hostiles minimum, Perry said quietly. Multiple fortified positions. Overlapping fields of fire. Kethril's tactical mind immediately processed the situation. This is not possible, he said. We are 4 soldiers against 60. The mathematics do not allow for success. Mathematics aren't everything. Sergeant Perry, I respect your determination. But there is wisdom in retreat. We have gathered valuable intelligence. We know the outpost layout. We can return with greater forces. Perry was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, Cole and Vance waited, their weapons ready. If we retreat, Perry said slowly, this array keeps broadcasting. The Dominion keeps coordinating their forces in this sector. More coalition soldiers die. He paused. How many more? 100? 1,000? We cannot save everyone. No, but we can save some. Perry turned to look at Kethril directly. That's the job. Not to survive. To make survival possible for others. Kethril did not have an answer for this. Among his people, sacrifice was understood as a tactical necessity in extreme circumstances. A soldier might give their life to protect critical infrastructure or vital personnel. But it was always a last resort, always weighed carefully against alternatives. Humans seemed to approach sacrifice differently. For them, it was not a last resort. It was simply another option on the table, considered alongside all the others, and they chose it so easily. We're doing this, Vance said from behind them. It was not a question. We're doing this, Perry confirmed. Cole simply checked his rifle one more time. His injured arm, hanging useless at his side. Kethril looked at each of them in turn. Tired, wounded, facing impossible odds. None of them seemed afraid. Or rather, they were afraid. But fear was just one more thing they had decided to ignore. What is your plan? Kethril asked. Perry pointed toward the left side of the chamber. Vance, you circle around. Plant charges on the secondary support columns. When they blow, it'll create confusion and cover. Vance nodded. Cole, you're with me. We push straight up the middle. Draw their fire. Keep them focused on us? Cole nodded too. Kethril. Perry hesitated. You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. Kethril considered the offer. He could stay here in relative safety while the humans threw themselves at the enemy. It was the logical choice. The Sylvani choice. But something had changed in him during this mission. Something he could not name. I will accompany you, he said. The center approach. Perry studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Stay close. They moved into position. Vance disappeared into the shadows along the chamber's edge, moving with surprising stealth for someone carrying explosives. Cole checked his rifle one last time. Perry took a deep breath. On my mark, Perry said. 3, 2, 1, mark. The world exploded into chaos. Kethril had experienced intense combat before, but nothing like this. They charged directly into enemy fire, sprinting across open ground toward fortified positions. Plasma bolts screamed past his head. Bullets sparked off the floor beside his feet. He ran anyway. Cole fired as he moved, his one good arm sweeping his rifle in controlled bursts. Enemies fell. Others took their place. The humans pushed forward regardless. Perry was at the front, leading by example. He moved from cover to cover, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. His rifle never stopped firing. Catherall followed, his own weapon barking in his hands. He felt plasma graze his armor. He felt impacts against his carapace. He ignored it all. He was doing what the humans did. He was overriding his survival instinct. It felt like madness. It felt like freedom. The first explosion rocked the chamber. One of Vance's charges. A support comm buckled, sending debris crashing down on an enemy position. Screams and confusion. They pushed harder. Another explosion. Another. The enemy formation was breaking. Soldiers scrambling to reposition as their defenses crumbled. Catherall found himself fighting alongside Cole, their backs to each other as enemies swarmed around them. The young human fought with only one arm, using his injured limb to brace his rifle against his body. His face was a mask of pain, but he never stopped fighting. Perry appeared beside them, cutting through enemies with brutal efficiency. "The tower!" he shouted. "We push for the tower!" They pushed, step by bloody step. The dead piled around them. Their own wounds accumulated, but they kept moving forward. And then they were there. The transmission tower rose before them, its lights blinking, its machinery humming with power. Vance emerged from the chaos, her armor cracked and smoking. She was already pulling charges from her pack, already calculating placement. "Cover me," she shouted. They formed a perimeter around her, holding back the remaining enemies while she worked. Catherall's arms screamed with exhaustion. His vision was blurring. He could feel his body beginning to shut down. He looked at the humans. They were in worse shape than him. Cole could barely stand. Perry was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Vance worked with trembling hands, but none of them stopped. "Charges set," Vance announced. She held up the detonator. 30-second timer. "Then we move," Perry said. Now, they ran for the exit, enemies still firing at their backs. Catherall felt impacts against his armor. He stumbled. Cole grabbed him with his one good arm and pulled him forward. They were almost at the door when Vance screamed. Catherall turned. She had fallen, her leg twisted at a wrong angle. The detonator had flown from her hand and lay on the ground several meters away. The display showed 20 seconds. Perry was already running back for her. Cole tried to follow but collapsed, his body finally giving out. Catherall watched as Perry reached Vance and lifted her in his arms. The sergeant's face was strained with effort. His own wounds were severe, but he did not leave her. 10 seconds. Perry reached the detonator. He looked at it. He looked at the door. The distance was too far. They were not going to make it. Perry met Catherall's eyes across the chaos, and he smiled. "Get Cole out," Perry said through the comm. "That's an order." Catherall understood. Perry was going to trigger the detonator manually. He was going to sacrifice himself to complete the mission. 5 seconds. Catherall grabbed Cole and pulled him toward the exit. The young human was barely conscious, muttering something about going back. 3 seconds. 2.1. The explosion ripped through the chamber. And Catherall, carrying a dying human in his arms, ran into the darkness. The corridor collapsed behind Catherall as he ran. He carried Cole over his shoulders, the young human's weight pressing down on his exhausted limbs. Dust and debris filled the air. The floor shook with secondary explosions as the communications array tore itself apart. Catherall did not think. He simply ran. His legs moved automatically, carrying him through smoke and fire toward the breach they had made in the eastern wall. His mind was empty except for one thought: survival. Not his own survival. Cole's survival. He reached the breach and stumbled outside. The cold air of Valen IV hit him like a physical blow. He fell to his knees, still clutching Cole, unable to go any further. Behind him, the outpost burned. Kethral's cum crackled. A voice he did not recognize was speaking, asking for status reports, offering coordinates for extraction. He could not form words to respond. Then another voice came through. Familiar. Impossible. Kethral? You still alive out there? It was Lisa Vance. Kethral's head snapped up. He looked back at the breach, at the smoke pouring from the ruined outpost. Two figures emerged from the darkness. Perry was first, his armor blackened and cracked, one arm hanging limp at his side. He was limping badly. Blood covered half his face. Vance was slung over his other shoulder, unconscious, but breathing. They had survived. Kethral could not understand it. The explosion had been catastrophic. The corridor had collapsed. There was no way anyone could have escaped. Perry walked toward him, each step clearly causing immense pain. When he reached Kethral, he carefully lowered Vance to the ground and then collapsed beside her. For a long moment, no one spoke. How? Kethral finally asked. The word came out as a croak. Perry coughed, then laughed weakly. Found a service tunnel? Last second. Barely. He paused, catching his breath. Thought we were done for. You should be dead. Probably. Perry turned his head to look at Kethral. His eyes were tired but alive. But we're not. That's what matters. Extraction arrived 20 minutes later. A coalition shuttle descended through the toxic atmosphere, its lights cutting through the smoke from the burning outpost. Medical teams rushed out, loading the wounded onto stretchers. Kethral refused treatment until he was sure the humans were being cared for. He watched as they carried Cole away, then Vance, then Perry. Each of them was in critical condition. Each of them might still die, but they had completed the mission. The communications array was destroyed. The Dominion forces in the sector would be operating blind. Thousands of coalition soldiers would have a better chance of survival because of what 4 people had done tonight. Kethral finally allowed the medics to examine him. His wounds were severe but not life-threatening. Sylvani biology was resilient. He would recover. 3 days later, he stood outside the medical bay of the Stellar Covenant. Through the window, he could see Perry sitting up in bed, talking with Cole and Vance. All 3 humans were wrapped in bandages and connected to various machines, but they were alive. Laughing even, the way they had laughed before the mission, Kethral entered the room. The humans looked up at him. Perry smiled and gestured to a chair beside his bed. There he is, Perry said. Our hero. I am not a hero, Kethral replied, sitting down. I simply completed the mission. You carried Marcus out of that hellhole. Pretty heroic if you ask me. You carried Corporal Vance out while severely wounded yourself. That is far more impressive. Perry shrugged, then winced at the movement. We take care of our own. That's just what you do. Kethral was quiet for a moment. He had spent the past 3 days thinking about everything that had happened. About the way humans fought. About the way they suffered. About the things they were willing to do to themselves. May I ask you something, Sergeant Perry? Daniel. Call me Daniel. And sure, on Valen 4, I observed something I cannot explain. Your species feels pain as intensely as any other. Your survival instincts are as strong as any other. And yet, you override these things. You ignore what your bodies tell you. Kethral paused. How is this possible? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Cole and Vance listened silently. Honestly? Daniel said at last. I don't know if there's a good answer. It's just something we've always done. We learn to push through pain because sometimes there's no other choice. We ignore fear because fear doesn't solve problems. But the cost, Kethral pressed. Your bodies break. Your minds suffer. How do you accept such a price? We don't accept it. We just pay it anyway. Daniel looked at his bandaged arms, at the machines monitoring his vitals. Every human who fights knows they might come back broken, or not come back at all. We do it because the alternative is worse. What alternative? Letting someone else pay the price instead. Catherall considered this. It was such a simple answer. Such a human answer. He thought of his own people, how they calculated risk and reward, how they preserved themselves for future battles. He thought of the logic that governed Sylvani culture, the cold mathematics of survival. Humans did not think that way. They did not calculate the value of their lives against potential outcomes. They simply saw what needed to be done and did it. Regardless of cost, it was inefficient. It was irrational. It was magnificent. I believe I understand now, Catherall said slowly. When I first met you, I thought humans were weak, fragile, primitive. Daniel grinned. And now? Now I know the truth. You are not the strongest species in the galaxy. Not the fastest. Not the smartest. Catherall paused. But you are the most terrifying. Terrifying. Vance laughed. Come on, we're not that bad. You are exactly that bad, Catherall replied seriously. Because you feel everything we feel. Every pain. Every fear. Every reason to stop. And you keep going anyway. That is not courage. Courage is overcoming fear. What you do is something else entirely. What is it? Cole asked quietly. Catherall thought carefully before answering. Will. Pure, unbreakable will. You have taken the survival instinct that rules every other species and learned to ignore it. You have made yourselves into something that should not exist. The room was silent. Is that a compliment? Daniel asked. It is the truth. Catherall stood. Fighting alongside humans, I realized a horror beyond anything I had faced before. Not the enemy. Not death. The horror was watching what you do to yourselves. The pain you endure. The limits you break. He walked toward the door, then stopped. But I also realized something else, he continued. If I must face horror, I would rather face it beside humans than against them. Because anyone who stands against you will learn what I learned. What's that? Daniel asked. Catherall looked back at the 3 wounded humans, broken and bandaged and still smiling. That you do not know how to stop. And that is the most frightening thing in the universe. He left the medical bay and walked alone through the corridors of the Stellar Covenant. Around him, the ship hummed with life. Soldiers of a dozen species went about their duties, preparing for the next battle. Somewhere among them were more humans. More soldiers who would break themselves against the enemy and keep fighting anyway. Catherall had once thought his species was superior. Now he knew better. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. Ancient empires and terrible enemies waited among the stars. But the galaxy also had humans, and that, Catherall thought, made all the difference. He did not know what battles awaited him in the future. He did not know if he would survive them, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never again underestimate the small, fragile, impossible creatures called humans, because they were the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. And he was proud to call them allies.